Hello and welcome to another episode of Thespians here on the Movie Pope channel. And today we have a very special guest here. The word excitement gets used quite a lot, but it can barely contain my excitement today because I've been planning for weeks to get this particular guest on the show. I have Professor T.H.M. Gellar-Goad of the Classics Department at Wake Forest University, based out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina here, and we are going to be chatting about masks. It's something that you really don't think about until you actually are confronted with the concept, and then you begin to think to yourself, okay, that's quite interesting. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We're always looking to grow our channel, so please share this video with everyone that you know. Sharing is caring, and it does let us know if we're going in the right direction. But without further ado, Dr. Gellar-Goad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I had a previous guest on, Melissa Dombrowski of Stone Soup Theater, based out of Chapel Hill, and she passed your information on to me, and she kind of hooked us up, and we've been communicating via email ever since. Like I said, I'm really excited about having you here because I've been trying to get a classics professor on the podcast to chat, and when you told me about the book that you wrote called Masks, it kind of piqued my interest. So before I go off tangent and ramble on about how excited I am and how I'm gushing at the gills, Professor, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you teach and what your specialty and interests are?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a professor of classics here at Wake Forest University. That means I teach Latin and ancient Greek and courses on Greek and Roman culture and literature in English. Every fall I teach a course, first-year seminar for students in their first semester of college, introducing them to ancient Greece and Rome through role-playing games, specifically called Reacting to the Past. These elaborate historical role-playing games where students are playing Athenian assemblymen deciding on the fate of Socrates, or Romans navigating the end of the Republic. I try to be very engaged in my teaching, and I try to be very engaged in my writing, both for scholarly audiences and, as with this book, Masks, with punctum books for a general audience.
Now I was going to say, because I took a few classics courses when I was at UNC Greensboro, and it was very much the sort of lecture style where people kind of just wrote stuff on the board and they gave you exercises and you did it. I think I think your approach is very, very interesting because it helps you learn to appreciate what the kind of culture that has kind of preceded us as a result. I remember watching a video with Dr. Michael Scott from the University of Warwick, and he actually did a demonstration of what a symposium looks like.
Yeah.
Just everybody reclining on the couches, and they were even trying to balance. I think it was the Kraton or whatever the fancy drinking cup is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty cool. So Professor, I want to dive into this book, Masks. Now, I will admit, I do feel a little bit guilty because I know this was a book that you worked really, really hard on, and I should have bought it online like the rest of us. But I found the link to your website, and I downloaded it as a free ebook. But I was going to say, like, this. When I initially read this book, I thought you were going to focus on masks within the Greco-Roman context, because obviously, given that you teach classics, I thought he's going to focus more on why the Greeks wear masks. Is it just to make it more visible to the audience members, or is it to convey a role or an expression or something like that? But as I read through the book, it became obvious that this isn't simply just a book about masks within a Greco-Roman or even Western context. It's very much a global and timeless concept. What prompted you to write this book in the first place?
Yeah, so first I'll start off by saying I'm delighted to hear you downloaded the book for free online. That the reason I chose to go with Tangent for publishing this book was specifically because they're gold open access, which means from day one, as soon as it was published, it was available for free download online for anybody. I don't make any money from any of the copies of the book, no matter how they're obtained, whether it's the print copy, the print on demand through their website or through Amazon, or whether it's a free download from their website. So I just want more people to read and more people to be thinking about and talking about masks. So
my conscience is clear now.
Yeah. That's one of the things I really liked about working with Tangent, and my editors Nandini Pandey and Scott Gerd were great on helping me out with the process. I thought it was a good experience working with my editors there. But all that aside, the way I got into this was actually one of my colleagues at Wake Forest, an English professor named Susan Harlan, published a book in 2017 or 2018 called Luggage. And it was a part autobiographical, but also part cultural analysis of the role of luggage in our lives. And it was for a series of books that had as its tagline, The Hidden Lives of Mundane Objects or Everyday Things or something like that. And so I went to a talk about her book and I thought that was really fascinating. And I thought, if I were ever going to write about an object, what would I write about? And I thought, oh, masks, because I study Greek and Roman theater, and I've worked some on Roman, thought some about Roman wax death masks. I could write something on masks, maybe. But I put it aside because it was 2018. I didn't have tenure yet. I didn't have my first book out yet. I had much more sort of pressing professional needs, career needs on my plate. And so I was like, oh, I'll come back to that later. Cut to late summer 2020, and I'm on a walk by myself on a nature trail, and I'm listening to a podcast, like a fictional podcast, and something they said in there about mirrors reminded me, oh yeah, I had thought about writing about masks that time a few years ago. And by this point, I had tenure. My first book was out. My second book was written. I had some freedom to decide what was next for me in my writing. And on that walk, I came up with 5 big things masks do. They help us make believe, like in theater or in Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
They are used in magical and religious rituals. They're tools for memory, like death masks and life masks. They're used for transformation, for metamorphosis, something as simple as makeup or as profound as a furry costume. And they're used to hold up a mirror to society in forms of protests or in the kind of masks or personas we try to present to our society when it comes to masking in passing or other behaviors. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's a good book I could pitch. And it was only the next day on the next nature walk that I was like, oh yeah, there's also the pandemic, and masking is kind of big now. And so that was the premise with which I started the book, not saying I'm going to do a catch-all 100% grand unified theory of masks, because I think that's impossible. Not every culture in the world masks, not every historical period has involved masks. Many do. A lot of them do. It's more unusual to have a society that doesn't have masks than one that does. But I wasn't trying for something grand or universal. I wasn't trying for something comprehensive, because that would be way larger than you could put into any one book and require a team of dozens and dozens of experts across various periods, histories, cultures, and disciplines. But I was instead trying to draw on key examples from across the world, from across time, of 6 big things masks do. Those 6 that I just said: medicine, magic, make-believe, metamorphosis, mirror, and memory. And also along the way, as it turned out, I was writing the first book-length study of masks to be published since the pandemic.
Oh, wow. Well, I was going to say, because as we go through this book, what's so fascinating is the fact that this one innocuous item can take on so many different forms, and as you say, perform many different functions. And I think and I think for most regular people, it kind of functions as a performative cover, really, because because whenever we step out into the wider world, and whenever we engage with other individuals, we are in a sense wearing a mask in order to at least give off the impression that we're someone that we either we are or we wish to be portrayed. It's kind of it kind of reminded me, it was a while ago. You remember the documentary about Ted Bundy, when they were talking about how how a lot of women, were attracted to him in spite of the fact that he, committed all these murders. And it just made me think, we can recognize this man as a monster because we have the evidence. We know that this man committed a lot of heinous deeds, and he should rightly be punished for it. But there's something peculiar about about the way that he appeals to a certain member of the audience. The fact that, in spite of the way that he looks, like an Adonis, he's still capable of committing these heinous acts, and he still receives accolades. And as I'm reading the book, it made me ask the question: is there a way of sort of divorcing mask from identity, or does it confound our understanding of what the world is?
Well, I think that gets into a deeper question that is to some degree unanswerable about sort of what makes up our self, what makes up who we are.
Right.
There are a lot of different theories about it from psychiatry, from psychology, from literary theory, from sociology, lots of different, from physics, lots of different ways of getting at it. And the sort of the big question, the lurking behind your question, is, do humans have interiority, or are we really just our interactions?
Right. And does the mask sort of facilitate, or does it hamper that? I guess
exactly, yeah.
I guess that's the best way I can phrase it.
Yeah, and so philosophy, this is a big debate in philosophy, sort of across millennia, I would say. But there's a hot topic in philosophy these days over the past 15, 20 years has been this notion of character and virtue ethics, and how does that fit or not fit with psychological studies that show that our behavior is by and large informed not by stable personality traits, but by our situational and environmental circumstances.
Right.
And so the way masks enter into this is, if you subscribe to this idea that we are just our interactions, then masks make us who we are. The masks we choose to wear, the masks we are forced to wear, the masks we wear without realizing it, make us who we are. If, on the other hand, you believe that there's a core of us inside that remains across our interactions, then the answer is a little more complicated. The answer is that the masks becomes a sort of medium or a mediation tool for us to interact between ourself and our society. And what I would say, what I would add here is, the Latin word for mask is persona, and it's from that word that we get the English word persona, as in, the act that you put on, or the role that you decide to play or are forced to play when in certain situations. But we also get the word person from this, and the whole concept of personhood, which originates initially in law, in Roman law, and in later law. The whole concept of personhood depends on the idea of what mask you're able to put on. Are you able to wear the mask of a citizen or someone legally able to stand for themselves in court? And it's from there that it becomes broadened into a legal concept, a citizenship concept, and then more broadly a psychological sense of who a person is, a sociological sense of who people are. And so in some ways, masks are kind of tied up even in the notion of us as people.
Right. And that's what I find so fascinating too, is because you use a lot of great examples in that book, because and I think I even mentioned it in one of the emails about how about how identity is very much tied to the wearing of the mask, whether it's providing what I think he used the Mandalorian as a very good example, as well as being able to subtract someone's identity, like the man in the iron mask. Can you talk a little bit about how, or whether it's possible to extricate masks from identity? Because I know you mentioned that as well, and I also want to ask, is it necessarily true that masks are also inextricably linked with performance, or can the two sort of be cleft apart, where the mask can stand on its own and performance can stand on its own, and the twain shall never meet?
Yeah, of course. So I think that we can start with some RuPaul, who says that you come into the world naked and the rest is drag, and this idea that to interact in society is to perform. We all have gender. It can be, there's a profound variety and diversity of gender, but gender is something that our society that develops as we develop in our society. Our gender is something that is sort of exists in the matrix between us, our society, and our more sort of immediate family and surroundings and the people we choose to be with. Gender has components of choice to it, but it also has components that are not our choice, that are just who we are. And yet gender is also a performance. And I'm drawing here on Judith Butler's famous gender trouble arguments. And Judith Butler has a much more recent book on Who's Afraid of Gender that's also worth checking out. So in some sense, we can't escape performance because we are social beings. And so the way that we navigate the world is through interacting with other humans, and that necessarily entails some sort of performance. And so from that perspective, I guess you could say that masks are inescapable. I end this book, one of the images with which I end the book is Future's music video for his track Mask Off.
Right.
And this video involves lots of people wearing different kinds of masks: riot mask, bondage mask, bandana, and Future himself using his hand as a mask to both hide his face from the viewer and build a sense of intimate connection with his viewer. But this video is also interesting because Future also has a mask of his own face. And I think about also the promo poster for Jordan Peele's Us, which is another thing I talk about in the book.
Right.
And the thing that we have to think about is there ever a time where we have our mask off? Maybe yes, maybe no. And I think the answer is probably different for each person. But to a certain extent, we are always changing how we present ourselves based on our situations. And maybe we are our truest selves when we're with our best friend or our beloved family member or our kid or our cat or something like that. But at the same time, we're showing a side of ourselves with them that we don't show anywhere else, and we may not even show when we're by ourselves. And so that is maybe just a different kind of mask rather than us unmasked. So I've kind of answered your question with a series of non-answers and more questions.
That totally makes sense, because because when you think about it, it's not necessarily true that we're never without a mask, because and I sort of like to draw the example from Seinfeld, where George says, where George explains to Jerry there are two Georges, and the worlds of these two Georges can never collide, right? If they do, then George, the friend you knew, is gone, and the other George kind of takes over. So it's kind of this notion where we wear these masks because it's our way of separating different aspects of our lives and our different worlds, and sort of keeping them at arm's length, because obviously we don't want our personal lives interacting with our professional lives and vice versa, because because there's some individuals who who would very much like to appear as good law-abiding citizens, but if we were to see who they were personally, we would probably find it abhorrent. As is the case with many people, following the incident on January 6th. But another thing that I wanted to ask you here, and I'm looking at the book right now. I gotta say, like, because you're drawing from so many different cultures, and putting this book together, and I gotta say it seems like a Herculean fit. So I do want to ask, like, what went into creating, putting this book together, because it started off with you sort of going on a nature walk and thinking to yourself about masks, and then here we are in 2025 where we are looking at this book, and it's just drawing from so many places to create this wonderful synthesis of a book. So can you talk about what that process was like?
Of course. And real quick, I want to say I'm delighted that you brought up a Seinfeld example, because I'm currently writing a book on Seinfeld and ancient Roman comedy. And that moment of George having the two selves is something that I connect to doubles in ancient Roman comedy as well. So yeah, how did I go about writing this book? Once I had my sort of big categories, which came it sort of felt like they came out of nowhere, but what it came out of was this sort of subconscious back of the brain processing that I'd been doing without realizing it over years, about thinking about masks. I had a couple of examples from my own area of expertise that I knew I wanted to talk about. So theatrical masks was an obvious fit for me because I'm a specialist in ancient Roman comedy. And also Roman death masks, as I mentioned earlier. Elite Roman men, when they died, a wax representation of their face would be sculpted. It would be kept in the household, both as a protector spirit, but also as kind of a surveilling the younger generations to make sure they upheld their ancestors' distinguished past. And then at funerals and maybe some other special festival occasions, ritual occasions, the mask would be brought out and would be worn either by descendants of the dead people or in some instances by paid actors who would embody and bring back to life the deceased ancestor by wearing the mask and acting like them. So I knew about that. I knew that was an example I want to talk about for thinking about memory. And of course, COVID masks were on my brain, as were plague doctor masks, because of the connection with the COVID pandemic. And
I really like that example, by the way. There's this one picture in the book where I think it was one of your colleagues was wearing the mask, and I was just like, I need to be friends with this person now.
Yeah. She, my colleague, Professor Amy Mars, I'm so glad she was up for me including that photo, because it's one of my favorite photos ever. So what I did was I sort of, this was both research and market competition surveying. So I looked for all the other books out there that I could find that presented themselves as about masks for a general audience. And what I found were some anthropological studies that tried to create these distinctions between modern and traditional cultures, and distinctions in modern cultures don't use masks and traditional ones do. And that didn't seem right to me, both because it was sort of creating this false dichotomy between modern and non-modern, and this modern happened to match pretty closely to Europe and the United States, and not to places outside the hegemony of the global North. And it compressed places outside of Europe and the United States with all ancient cultures and those sorts of things. That was actually a surprisingly common component, this notion of there are traditional and there are then there's often using the term Western, and I reject the notion of Western culture. It's a construct that serves white supremacy rather than reflecting actual history or cultural exchange or interchange. But so that was one category. Another category was museum catalogs that had, hundreds of beautiful photographs of carefully curated objects of masks and helmets and that sort of thing, and tried to categorize them either by usage or by period or by part of the world, or something like that. And the third category I found were more specific scholarly studies on masks in one place and one time. So masks in agricultural festivals in Muslim North Africa, or masks in late 19th, early 20th century West Africa as a tool for interstate relationships and negotiation with colonizing European imperialist powers. And so what I wanted to do with this book was something that put these elements in conversation with one another. And of course, I'm not an expert in West African culture. I'm not an expert in Islam. I'm not an expert in medicine or epidemiology. I'm only an expert in Greek and Roman culture and literature. But what I want to do was to take a long view, one that put ancient and modern and periods in between in conversation with one another, that was choosing things from across the globe, so that I wasn't fetishizing or tokenizing one specific group, or creating an other that I was defining my own culture in opposition to. And I also wanted to put an eye, a reflective eye, on my own society and the ways in which we use masks. you know, people in the modern United States before the pandemic maybe weren't encountering masks or mask wearing as an everyday thing. This was maybe a Mardi Gras Halloween thing, sort of like you have, you have everyday Christians and then you have Easter and Christmas Christians, or Rosh Hashanah and Passover Jews like me. But that's only for one sense of masks. And what I realized as I was putting together the ideas behind this book is really we do engage with masks on a daily basis, even if we're not seeing people with face masks to prevent the spread of COVID or flu or whatever.
Yeah.
But we are engaging with them in ways we're not attuned to. And that attuning to them can, I think, be a really helpful tool for us to understand how we are building ourselves, our identity, how we're choosing to interact with society, and possibilities that we could open for ourselves by exploring different kinds of masking in new ways that might open up new avenues of identity for us.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, because in reading this book, it's not very technical. It's very much like an introduction to masks, and that's what I really, really appreciate about this book, is because it takes something that's something that's very simple yet mysterious, and all the culture and all of the all the different concepts that go behind it, and you sort of put it in layman's terms that anybody can understand. I really, really do appreciate that. So another thing I want to ask you too, because obviously you're a classics professor, you mainly focus on the Greco-Roman world. Was it a bit of a surprise? I mean, did you find it surprising that you were dipping into different cultures and different time periods in order to tell this story about the mask and its use and its function within the wider scope of humanity?
I guess what I'd say is that I knew I wanted to move beyond my own area of expertise, just to make it a bigger picture than my narrow window, and also something that would appeal to people other than ones who already were interested in Greek and Roman culture, or the stuff that I'm sort of kind of used to talking about. And also I wanted to make it something that I wanted to make it a reflection or a cultural essay on my my own experience, my own time. And this book, more than any other book I've written, I've put more of myself into it than any other book I've written. And actually, my editors were really great in drawing me out further and saying, "I'd like to hear more on this point. I'd like to hear more on this point." And so that component too made me realize I was going to be doing more than that. And it's kind of an interesting thing that for a guy who wrote a book on masks, I haven't generally been able to wear masks very much. Of course, I wore masks a lot before vaccines and while mask mandates were still in place. And I if I'm contagious and I need to go somewhere, I'll try to avoid that. But if I need to, then I'll mask up. And if someone asks me to mask up because they're seeking to be cautious, I definitely will. But I wear glasses. I wear big glasses, and I've determined that I cannot make it around without my glasses. I tried Halloween once as Space Pope from Futurama, and I had a crocodile mask on and no glasses. And my husband had to lead me around the streets of Franklin Street and Chapel Hill because I literally could not see past the mask. And so I thought masks aren't for me. But as I wrote the book, even before I discovered something I talk about in the conclusion of the book, a mask built for someone who wears glasses, even before I discovered that, I came to realize, oh yeah, I do wear a lot of masks. It's just I haven't been thinking about it. So those were some of the surprises, were some personal ones, as well as finding some really fascinating things out about the way masking works in different periods and in different times and different cultures.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting too, is the fact that in the thousands of years of human history, we haven't found a way to sort of differentiate how we're going to use the mask. The mask pretty much functions the way that it has for thousands of years. Whether you're watching a medieval play, or going to a Victorian party, or going to Franklin Street on Chapel Hill, people kind of figure out it's used to cover your face, and it's used for either having fun or having mischief. Did your colleagues or did any of your peers read this book and give you their feedback on masks, or was it just one of those things where people kind of were just saying to you, "Whoa, you wrote a book about masks? Okay, I didn't know that."
Yeah, so this was actually peer reviewed as well as being open access and meant for everyone. So I had a couple of scholars give me feedback in addition to my editor, and got great feedback. One of the scholars is an expert in Greek tragedy, and specifically in sort of like the cognitive and material aspects of Greek tragedy. And so he was able to give me a lot of helpful ways in thinking about performance, thinking about the way audience and performer interact, and what's going on in our brains when we're watching something that is fictional or at least staged, but also we're watching it as ourselves in a world that is real to us. And so yeah, I think the book is better for having gotten feedback. I don't know if anyone in my department has read the book yet, but they're very busy people with things on their plate. So I'm sure it's on their summer beach reading list, at least, if nothing else.
Well, I want to circle back to your friend because you said that the inspiration came because she wrote a book called Luggage. Did she have a chance to look at your book?
Yeah, actually, Susan Harlan, she looked at my proposal when I was initially pitching the book and gave me some really helpful suggestions. And I talk a bit about this one artist who does photographs of herself as different character types using masks. And that suggestion to include that in the book was all Susan's suggestion. And so I'm very thankful to her on that. And I sent her a copy of the book, and she got a kick out of it. And I think I did a good job writing a masks version of her Luggage book in some sense.
But I mean, it's kind of appropriate because and I'm sure you're very much well aware of this, is the fact that regardless of whether it's physical or emotional or metaphorical luggage, we're carrying baggage just as much as we're wearing a mask. So we're anchored down by by all the baggage that we have to carry, regardless of whatever it is, and we're also having to put on a face before the world, so the world doesn't see the pain that we have to undergo each day.
Yeah.
So it's just so profound. Like I really do appreciate you writing this book, because reading it, it's like, this is something that I don't think anybody has ever really touched upon. Now you mentioned earlier that you're going to be working on another book, which is sort of which is going to be taking a look at a very popular sitcom from the 1990s with Roman comedy. Can you give us a little taste of that?
Yeah, of course. So putting into conversation with one another ancient Roman comedy and the almost as ancient sitcom Seinfeld, as I pitch it. There is a case that can be made for a direct connection between ancient Roman comedy and Seinfeld, because both of the show's co-creators, Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David, got theater degrees, and Roman comedy is a standard part of the theater history curriculum. So it's quite conceivable that in college they read Roman comedy and drew some from it. Even more so, they were coming of age during the time that a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, first hit Broadway and then Hollywood as sort of a mega success. And as scholars working on A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum have shown, that musical was sort of the moment where classics and Jewish comedy and Broadway intersected in a sort of profound way. And so Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, as Jewish comics coming of age when that was in the zeitgeist, I think it's quite possible that that's a sort of an indirect influence on them. But what I'm more interested in is seeing how their pairs of comic techniques and ways of constructing comedies in the plays of ancient Roman comedy and in the episodes of Seinfeld that are similar and operate in similar ways. And I want to look at what Seinfeld can tell us about ancient comedy by saying, okay, with Seinfeld, we've got the live audience, we've got video recordings, so we can look at aspects of gesture and blocking that aren't shown in the ancient Roman comedy, which exists only as texts, without blocking indications, without stage direction, anything like that. And we've got also this sort of contemporaneous information on reception, on what people at the time thought of these comedies that we don't have for ancient Roman comedy. So what can Seinfeld tell us about Plautus? And also what can ancient Roman comedy, Plautus and Terence, what can they tell us about Seinfeld? Because there's been several hundred years of scholarship on ancient Roman comedy that allows us to really pick apart how these plays work in very clear detail with a deep understanding of the mechanics going on behind the scenes that can elucidate, can show why Seinfeld is so good at doing what it does, and what are some of the dynamics that you sort of get, but you don't have words for maybe in talking about it. How can scholarship from ancient Roman comedy illuminate that?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the fact that it's not the fact that you could sort of like thread a connection between Roman comedy and Seinfeld, but it's the fact that you're focusing on Roman comedy, because I would have thought you would have dug even further back and looked at someone like Aristophanes, for instance, or Menander. Why Roman comedy in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it is that Seinfeld is much closer to Roman comedy than to Aristophanes. I'll come back to Menander in a second. But okay. Aristophanes, political, vulgar, raunchy, and sort of in very fantastical, with gods or anthropomorphic birds or a Greece-wide sex strike, that sort of thing. Whereas Plautine comedy ancient Roman comedy is much closer to the domestic sitcom genre, and that's sort of what Seinfeld is operating in and operating against. This is true of Menander, the Greek comedian, as well. Plautus and Terence, the authors of Roman comedy, are adapting and reimagining plays from Menander and from Menander's contemporaries, these Greek playwrights writing in a specific genre called Greek New Comedy. But with Menander, the focus is really on citizen families and forming marriage bonds and reproducing citizen children.
So sort of like the 1950s sitcoms like Leave It to Beaver and all that stuff.
Exactly right. And Plautus, as recent scholarship has shown, Plautus, the Roman comedian, is not interested in those stories, and he is interested in taking those stories and moving the focus around to enslaved people, to women in danger, to the sort of kind of low life scuzzbaggery that you can get into if you have a lot of money and not a lot of restrictions or rules, and that sort of counterculturalness is something that was distinctive about Seinfeld when it came out as well, being focused in an urban setting, being focused on unmarried, childless people in their 30s, made Seinfeld very distinct from things like Leave It to Beaver, and even from contemporaries like The Cosby Show or Roseanne or something like that, that was the focus on these people who have enough money to get up to no good, have enough security to know that no matter how much they screw up at their job, they're going to be fine. That they can go for a couple of seasons unemployed and still somehow eat at the coffee shop every day, like George Costanza does. All of these things are good fits for the kind of characters and the kind of storylines we see in ancient Roman comedy.
I'm really, really excited about this now. I want to have you come back on very soon so we can have that discussion.
Absolutely.
I'm very curious to see which character or how you can draw in a comparison between Kramer and his ancient Roman counterparts, because I would love to see how the Romans would have portrayed someone like Kramer, always like bursting in, just mooching off his friends.
Oh yeah, super easy. He's a combination of the trickster character and the mooch.
Well, he is kind of a trickster because the character that does come to mind is Martin Van Nostrand when he tries to get Elaine's medical records.
Yeah, and he's always got some sort of scheme or gimmick or pitch that he's working on.
Oh my! Like seriously, we got to have you come back on very soon to have that discussion.
Absolutely.
Seinfeld and ancient Rome. But I do want to be respectful of your time, Doctor, because I know you're a very a busy person, especially with the spring semester going on right now. But before we sign off, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to check out your works, where can they go?
So my website is available on classics.wfu.edu. If you go there and you click on faculty and staff, you'll see me and you can click through for more info about me. And if you Google Masks book, then I think I'm the top result. If not, you can look for Punctum Books. Is where the publishing house that my book came out with. So Masks by T.H.M. Gellar-Goad at Punctum Books is where you can find it, download it for free, read it, and you can hit me up anytime with questions or thoughts. I'd be happy to hear. I'm happy to hear from my readers. I heard from someone who was writing a paper for a English class about masking, and wrote and said, "Thanks so much for your book; it was really helpful." And we exchanged a few emails. It was great to hear from them. And I'm happy to hear critiques as well as praise. I'm always looking to build my own understanding and knowledge of masks and comedy and the other things that I work on.
Can I make a suggestion? I would like to see if there's because I've been thinking about this for quite a while. I've been wondering if there's a way you could sort of draw an analogy between, between Star Trek, the endless quest of seeking out new lives and new civilizations, and the great odysseys of Greco-Roman literature, like the Aeneid or the Odyssey or the Golden Fleece. Like I would really, really love to see that happen. No pressure, just saying.
I mean, there's definitely something there for sure.
I mean, that'd be very, very cool to have, like, Jason just staying on the bow of the ship reciting the same speech.
Yeah. My favorite sci-fi series is Babylon 5. And in one of the episodes of that, the captain does quote a Tennyson poem, which is giving voice to a speech that Odysseus gave, that he says Odysseus gave to his crew.
Excellent.
The whole "we are not that now, that strength that in previous generations something, but that which we are." That poem is quoted in there. So I think that sci-fi writers are often have the sort of some of the great myths and legends and poems in mind. And there's a specific Dan Simmons, this one sci-fi author, has a pair of books, Ilium and Olympus, that retell the Iliad from the perspective of Martians.
Excellent. Well, Professor, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I really, really want to have you come back on as soon as possible. I would love to collaborate with you on future episodes, so please just let me know what your schedule looks like. I want to make something happen. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch this episode. If you're enjoying the content, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. And as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next one.